Hello, everybody. Great to be back in New York with all of our friends and some great friends outside the building, I must tell you. I want to thank all of our distinguished guests who are with us today, including members of our cabinet, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, OMB Director Mick Mulvaney, and of course our Transportation Secretary, who's doing a fabulous job, Elaine Chao. Thank you all for doing a really incredible and creative job on what we're going to be discussing today, which is infrastructure. We've just had a great set of briefings upstairs on our infrastructure agenda. My administration is working every day to deliver the world-class infrastructure that our people deserve and, frankly, that our country deserves. That's why I just signed a new executive order to dramatically reform the nation's badly broken infrastructure permitting process. Just blocks away is the Empire State Building. It took 11 months to build the Empire State Building. But today, it can take as long as a decade and much more than that. Many, many stories where it takes 20 and 25 years just to get approvals to start construction of a fairly routine highway. Highway builders must get up to 16 different approvals involving 9 different federal agencies governed by 29 different statutes. One agency alone can stall a project for many, many years and even decades. Not only does this cost our economy billions of dollars, but it also denies our citizens the safe and modern infrastructure they deserve. This over-regulated permitting process is a massive, self-inflicted wound on our country. It's disgraceful. Denying our people much-needed investments in their community, and I just want to show you this because it was just shown me, and I think I'm going to show it to the media. Both real and fake media, by the way. This is what it takes to get something approved today. Elaine, you see that? So this is what it takes. Permitting process flowchart. That's a flowchart. So that can go out to 20 years. This shows about 10. But that could go out to about 20 years to get something approved. This is for a highway. I've seen a highway recently in a certain state. I won't mention its name. It's 17 years. I could have built it for $4 or $5 million without the permitting process. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but it took 17 years to get it approved and many, 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 many pages of environmental impact studies. This is what we will bring it down to. This is less than 2 years. This is going to happen quickly. That's what I'm signing today. This will be less than 2 years for a highway. So it's going to be quick. It's going to be a very streamlined process. And by the way, if it doesn't meet environmental safeguards, we're not going to approve it. Very simple. We're not going to approve it. So this is just, maybe this one will say, let's throw the other one away. Would anybody like it from the media? Would anybody like that long, beautiful chart? You can have it. So my executive order also requires agencies to work together efficiently by requiring one lead agency for each major infrastructure project. It also holds agencies accountable if they fail to streamline their review process. So each agency is accountable. We're going to get infrastructure built quickly, inexpensively, relatively speaking, and the permitting process will go very, very quickly. No longer will we tolerate one job-killing delay after another. No longer will we accept a broken system that benefits consultants and lobbyists at the expense of hardworking Americans. Now, I knew the process very well, probably better than anybody. I had to get permits for this building and many of the buildings I built, all of the buildings I built in Manhattan and many other places. And I will tell you that the consultants are rich people. They go around making it very difficult. They lobby Congress. They lobby state governments, city governments to make it very difficult so that you have to hire consultants and that you have to take years and pay them a fortune. So we're streamlining the process, and we won't be having so much of that anymore. No longer will we allow the infrastructure of our magnificent country to crumble and decay. While protecting the environment, we will build gleaming new roads, bridges, railways, waterways, tunnels, and highways. We will rebuild our country with American workers, American iron, American aluminum, American steel. We will create millions of new jobs and make millions of American dreams come true. Our infrastructure will again be the best in the world. We used to have the greatest infrastructure anywhere in the world. And today we're like a third world country. We are literally like a third world country. Our infrastructure will again be the best. And we will restore the pride in our communities, our nation. And all over the United States, we'll be proud again. So I want to thank everybody for being here. God bless you. God bless the United States. And if you have any questions, we have Mick, you could come up here, please. Come on up. Mick Mulvaney. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Why do you think these CEOs are leaving your manufacturing council?
Because they're not taking their job seriously as it pertains to this country. We want jobs, manufacturing in this country. If you look at some of those people that you're talking about, they're outside of the country. They're having a lot of their product made outside. If you look at Merck as an example, take a look where, take a look at where their product is made. It's made outside of our country. We want products made in the country. Now, I have to tell you, some of the folks that will leave, they're leaving out of embarrassment because they make their products outside. And I've been lecturing them, including the gentleman that you're referring to, about you have to bring it back to this country. You can't do it necessarily in Ireland and all of these other places. You have to bring this work back to this country. That's what I want. I want manufacturing to be back into the United States so that American workers can benefit.
Let me ask you, Mr. President, why did you wait so long to last neo-Nazi?
I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct, not make a quick statement. The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement. But you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. You still don't know the facts. And it's a very, very important process to me. And it's a very important statement. So I don't want to go quickly and just make a statement for the sake of making a political statement. I want to know the facts. If you go back to my, in fact, I brought it. As I said on, remember this, Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And then I went on from there. Now, here's the thing. As to, excuse me, take it nice and easy. Here's the thing. When I make a statement, I like to be correct. I want the facts. This event just happened. In fact, a lot of the event didn't even happen yet as we were speaking. This event just happened. Before I make a statement, I need the facts. So I don't want to rush into a statement. So making the statement when I made it was excellent. In fact, the young woman, who I hear is a fantastic young woman, and it was on NBC, her mother wrote me and said through, I guess, Twitter, social media, the nicest things, and I very much appreciated that. I hear she was a fine, really actually an incredible young woman, but her mother on Twitter thanked me for what I said. And honestly, if the press were not fake, and if it was honest, the press would have said what I said was very nice. But unlike you and unlike the media, before I make a statement, I like to know the facts. They don't.
Here's Andrew England.
How about a couple of infrastructure
that
questions?
event? Was that terrorism?
Say it. What?
The CEO of Walmart said you missed a critical opportunity to help bring the country together. Did you?
Not at all. I think the country, look, you take a look. I've created over 1 million jobs since I'm president. The country is booming. The stock market is setting records. We have the highest employment numbers we've ever had in the history of our country. We're doing record business. We have the highest levels of enthusiasm. So the head of Walmart, who I know, who's a very nice guy, was making a political statement. I mean, ask him how he's doing. I do it the same way, and you know why? Because I want to make sure, when I make a statement, that the statement is correct. And there was no way of making a correct statement that early. I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters. I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. And the facts, as they started coming out, were very well stated. In fact, everybody said his statement was beautiful. If he would have made it sooner, that would have been good. I couldn't have made it sooner because I didn't know all of the facts. Frankly, people still don't know all of the facts. It was very important, excuse me. It was very important to me to get the facts out and correctly. Because if I would have made a fast statement, and the first statement was made without knowing much other than what we were seeing. The second statement was made after, with knowledge, with great knowledge. There's still things, there's still things that people don't know. I want to make a statement with knowledge. I wanted to know the facts. Okay.
Two questions. Was this terrorism? And can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist?
Well, I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism. You can call it murder. You can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. Because there is a question. Is it murder? Is it terrorism? And then you get into legal semantics. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
Can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist, Mr. Bannon? Can you talk about that?
I would echo Maggie's question. Steve Bannon is...
I never spoke to Mr. Bannon about it.
Tell us broadly what do you still have confidence in Steve?
Well, we'll see. And look, I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist. I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon, but he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
Do you have confidence that Senator McCain has called on you to defend your National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, against
I've
these
already done
attacks?
it. I did it the last time.
And he called on it again, linking this
Senator McCain?
to the alt-right. And
Senator McCain, you mean the one who voted against Obamacare?
And he said
Who is Senator? You mean Senator McCain who voted against us getting good health care?
McCain said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying,
define it for me. Come on, let's go. Define
Senator
it for me.
McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came charging at him? Excuse me. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's
Let me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. Fake news. That was a horrible day. I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Go ahead.
Do you think that what you call the alt-left is the same as neo-Nazis?
Those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? But they were there to protest, excuse me, you take a look the night before, they were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. Infrastructure question, go ahead.
Should statues of Robert E. Lee stay up?
I would say that's up to a local town, community, or the federal government, depending on where it is located.
Are you against the Confederacy?
How concerned are you about race relations in America? And do you think things have gotten worse or better since you took office?
I think they've gotten better or the same. Look, they've been frayed for a long time, and you can ask President Obama about that because he'd make speeches about it. But I believe that the fact that I've brought in, it will be soon, millions of jobs. You see where companies are moving back into our country. I think that's going to have a tremendous positive impact on race relations. We have companies coming back into our country. We have 2 car companies that just announced. We have Foxconn in Wisconsin just announced. We have many companies, I say, back into the country. I think that's going to have a huge positive impact on race relations. You know why? It's jobs. What people want now, they want jobs. They want great jobs with good pay. And when they have that, you watch how race relations will be. And I'll tell you, we're spending a lot of money on the inner cities. We're fixing the inner cities. We're doing far more than anybody's done with respect to the inner cities. It's a priority for me, and it's very important.
Mr. President, are you putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane?
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is.
On both sides, sir? You said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as neo, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No.
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country. Does anybody have a final? Does anybody have? You have an infrastructure.
What makes you think you can get an infrastructure bill? You didn't get health care.
Well, you know, I'll tell you. We came very close with health care. Unfortunately, John McCain decided to vote against it at the last minute. You'll have to ask John McCain why he did that. But we came very close to health care. We will end up getting health care, but we'll get the infrastructure. And actually, infrastructure is something that I think will have bipartisan support on. I actually think Democrats will go along with the infrastructure.
President, have you spoken to the family? Have you spoken to the family of the victim of the car attack?
No, I'll be reaching out. When will you
be reaching out?
I was I thought that the statement put out, the mother's statement, I thought was a beautiful statement. I always tell you, it was something that I really appreciated. I thought it was terrific, and really under the kind of stress that she's under and the heartache that she's under, I thought putting out that statement to me was really something I won't forget. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you plan to go to Charlottesville, Mr. President?
Do you think you're helping to heal the nation?
I own a house in Charlottesville.
Will you go to?
Does anyone know I own a house in Charlottesville?
Where is it?
Oh boy, it's going to be. It's in Charlottesville. You'll see.
Is it near the winery or something?
It is the winery.
Will you go visit and try to?
I mean, I know a lot about Charlottesville. Charlottesville is a great place that's been very badly hurt over the last couple of days. I own actually one of the largest wineries in the United States. It's in Charlottesville.
What do you think needs to be done to overcome the racial divides?
Well, I really think jobs can have a big impact. I think if we continue to create jobs, over 1 million, substantially more than 1 million, and you see just the other day, the car companies coming in with Fox, Fox. I think if we continue to create jobs at levels that I'm creating jobs, I think that's going to have a tremendous impact, positive impact on race relations.
And what you said today, how do you think that will impact the racial?
Because the people are going to be working, they're going to be making a lot of money, much more money than they ever thought possible.
I mean, your remarks
so that's going to happen. And the other thing, very important, I believe wages will start going up. They haven't gone up for a long time. I believe wages now, because the economy is doing so well with respect to employment and unemployment, I believe wages will start to go up. I think that'll have a tremendously positive impact on race relations.
Why haven't you been drawn to you, Mr. Charleston, Mr. President?
Was Trump Tower wiretap?
You have President Trump in the lobby of Trump Tower here in New York City, starting, of course, with a press conference designed to talk about his plans for infrastructure development, but derailing very quickly into a very heated back and forth with the number of reporters who'd gathered there in the lobby. We're going to break it all down right now with my colleague Mary Alice Parks, who joins us live in Washington, D.C. And Mary Alice, there was a lot covered in there, but I think we need to start with something that's been talked about a lot over the last few days, and that is the president's response to the horrific events, the deadly events in Charlottesville, Virginia, over the weekend. The president seemed to again revert back to his original statement, in which he seems to be equating the two sides that clashed there. That is the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, and people who marched with them, and those who were opposing them.
Exactly. If there was any question about how President Trump really felt about what happened the last few days, I think we just got an answer. He made a point of talking about the alt-right and using a term, the alt-left. He said there was blame to go around. We were right back in that language of many sides to blame, that exact language that had caused so much blowback, members of his own party saying that he was not doing enough to stamp out and condemn white supremacists marching in the South.
Now, it took 2 days to get a clarifying statement out of the president, a very carefully crafted and carefully delivered statement that then named some of those groups in condemnation. And then today, we heard the president refer back to them in a different way. Actually, let's just listen to that soundbite real quick. Take a listen.
I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Go ahead.
Do you think that what you call the alt-left is the same as neo-Nazis?
Those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
And Mary Alice, we heard the president again and again reiterate those remarks right there. He was given several chances. This was followed up on a number of times by reporters there, and he continued to basically use very harsh language against the protesters. He's calling the alt-left, those who were there to fight back against the alt-right marchers who were there, and making excuses for those who were marching in support of keeping the statue, calling them very fine people, saying there were some very fine people in the mix there. This is incredibly troubling language to hear from the President of the United States.
It is really shocking. There is so much there to unpack. First, his absolute outright attack of the press, saying that the press got this wrong. The press that took photographs that captured Nazi salutes, Confederate flags, white nationalist language and symbols, white supremacist language and symbols. The press captured sounds and images that shocked the rest of the country. That was why you got backlash and opposition, swift, fierce opposition to the president's previous remarks, not because the press got something wrong. Like you said, unbelievable the way that he defends people in that crowd. I think that the country heard and saw for their own eyes the symbols and the language that crowd was using. So the idea of saying they weren't all bad when there was clearly a tone of white supremacy in that crowd, also remarkable. And then, like you said, sort of blaming the other side, this idea of responsibility to go around. It is true that there was clearly violence that erupted. It often takes two to throw a punch, but there were plenty of eyewitnesses on the ground that talked about members of the clergy linking arms and singing gospel as they got hurt and beat and things thrown at them. These are not just reporters or members of the far left that were shocked by the president's reaction over the last few days. That's why you had members of his own party saying, Mr. President, you are not doing enough. It is clear. It was clear to them. And that is why these comments today just seem to totally backtrack where the president, what the president had done to start to stop the political bleeding. It was really a remarkable reversal in the last few days. I feel a little bit speechless.
You know, Mary Alice, there is a couple of things that went by very quickly in some of the president's responses there that are worth pointing out. Some of the language that he used there about the efforts to remove some symbols of the Confederacy. He accused people of wanting to change history, of wanting to change culture. That mimics almost exactly much of the language used by white supremacists and white nationalists and those sympathetic to their cause. And we've seen in the past Republicans and the leadership there speak out against this president when they thought he wasn't being harsh enough in his condemnation of these groups. Do you think that his comments today could trigger a similar response?
Absolutely. You know, I keep thinking how much different the last few days would have been if lawmakers had been here in D.C. answering some questions in real time. But it didn't matter that members of his own party were around the country in their home states. They felt the need to speak out against this president over the last few days, and they didn't feel like his reaction was strong enough. And I imagine that they will respond to this as well. You know, just looking at where we are in history right now, yesterday we had Republican senators that felt the need to give congratulations and attaboys to the president for condemning neo-Nazis, as if condemning neo-Nazis was something newsworthy and remarkable. Now we have a president backtracking in a lot of ways again, saying, I really do think there's blame to go around. You don't see the full picture, really even sort of backpedaling from his own latest comments. It is a remarkable sort of turn of events. And if there was ever a question whether the last few days was going to sort of end up as a moment in history in this presidency, I think we just solidified it here. From here on out, every single time the president uses that gut-punching language of his, you know, he has that firebrand spirit where he is quick to lash out or speak out or use a name. Every time he does that on Twitter or in front of the cameras, people will compare his response to this, to what happened in Charlottesville. How does his harsh language about anyone else compare to the language he used against white supremacists and white nationalists when they were clearly marching in the streets?
Mary Alice, this is a bigger picture question now in the way the conversation is unfolding from the president's perspective. But one of the very first questions was about why it took him so long to speak out and condemn some of those hate groups that participated in the march. The president's response was surprising to some degree because he said, I'd like to take things slowly. I don't like to react quickly. I didn't have all the facts. This is a president who's been known to fire off tweets in the heat of the moment in response to a television segment he's watching. Is this a different side to the president that we haven't seen before, or does it send another message?
Well, frankly, I think that's why it seemed a little bit disingenuous to a lot of people. People will question those motives because you're right, that's not the temperament that we've seen from this president. That's not what he's known for. His brand has been much more one of quick response, sometimes knee-jerk reactions, quick on his feet. He likes that about himself, right? That he doesn't hold back. That he can lash out when he feels like he needs to and can speak quickly. So the idea that now, in such an incredible moment of crisis for this country, he is now saying it was important to gather facts. I mean, the idea of a politician wanting to wait until all the facts were in to review what they were hearing from law enforcement before speaking, that's fair. That is 100% a fair comment. But I think that you're right. That feels very different from the tone and typical behavior of this president, which makes it feel a little bit disingenuous. But also remember, this was when he wants all the facts. This was after the first time he spoke was after a protester there protesting with members of the clergy protesting for a message of inclusion was killed in what looked to many like a very, very deliberate act of domestic terrorism. He waited until after she had died, after this horrific attack to speak, after a number of members of his close family, his daughter, his wife had taken to Twitter to speak out against what they were seeing on TV. Members of his own party had spoken. So, and it was still seen as a very sort of milquetoast, weak, wishy-washy original comment. So to say that he was just waiting until he had all the facts right, I'm just not sure that many people are going to buy it, and that's going to be enough.
Now, he was also asked about the man that many people point to as having introduced a lot of these ideas to his administration and his policies, and that is Steve Bannon, who, of course, gave a platform, a huge platform, to many who hold these white nationalist and white supremacist views. He was asked about his confidence in this strategic advisor and his senior advisor in the West Wing, and it wasn't exactly a resounding endorsement that Mr. Bannon will continue to be there.
No, two things struck me about that. He said, Steve Bannon's not a racist. That's baseline for working in the White House. But that, I mean, it's remarkable that we're having this level of conversation right now. So the president does not think Steve Bannon is a racist. That makes sense if he wants to keep him
Mary Alice,
on.
I'm going to cut you off for just a second, please. We're going right now to a network special report.
This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we come on the air at this hour because of breaking news from Trump Tower here in New York City. We have been monitoring comments made by President Trump just a short time ago. Those comments come in the wake of what we witnessed in Charlottesville over the weekend. He was speaking to reporters ostensibly about infrastructure and his hopes for an infrastructure plan for America moving forward. But almost immediately, the questions began to turn to his reaction to Charlottesville, the fact that it took 48 hours before he actually singled out groups involved in what we witnessed in Charlottesville. And we want to play for you part of the president. Our team is standing by. Here's what the president said just moments ago.
If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Why do you think these CEOs are leaving your manufacturing council?
Because they're not taking their job seriously as it pertains to this country. We want jobs, manufacturing in this country. If you look at some of those people that you're talking about, they're outside of the country. They're having a lot of their product made outside. If you look at Merck as an example, take a look where, take a look at where their product is made. It's made outside of our country. We want products made in the country. Now, I have to tell you, some of the folks that will leave, they're leaving out of embarrassment because they make their products outside. And I've been lecturing them, including the gentleman that you're referring to, about you have to bring it back to this country. You can't do it necessarily in Ireland and all of these other places. You have to bring this work back to this country. That's what I want. I want manufacturing to be back into the United States so that American workers can benefit.
Let me ask you, President, why did you wait so long for the last neo-Nazi?
I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct, not make a quick statement. The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement. But you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. You still don't know the facts. And it's a very, very important process to me. And it's a very important statement. So I don't want to go quickly and just make a statement for the sake of making a political statement. I want to know the facts. If you go back to my, in fact, I brought it.
Who did you bring, Mr. President?
As I said on, remember this, Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And then I went on from there. Now, here's the thing. As to, excuse me, take it nice and easy. Here's the thing. When I make a statement, I like to be correct. I want the facts. This event just happened. In fact, a lot of the event didn't even happen yet as we were speaking. This event just happened. Before I make a statement, I need the facts. So I don't want to rush into a statement. So making the statement when I made it was excellent. In fact, the young woman, who I hear is a fantastic young woman, and it was on NBC, her mother wrote me and said through, I guess, Twitter, social media, the nicest things, and I very much appreciated that. I hear she was a fine, really actually an incredible young woman, but her mother on Twitter thanked me for what I said. And honestly, if the press were not fake, and if it was honest, the press would have said what I said was very nice. But unlike you and unlike the media, before I make a statement, I like to know the facts. They don't.
Here's Andrew Anglin.
Listen, how about a couple of
How
about a couple of infrastructure
questions? Was that terrorism?
Say it. What?
CEO of Walmart said you missed a critical opportunity to help bring the country together. Did you?
Not at all. I think the country, look, you take a look. I've created over 1 million jobs since I'm president. The country is booming. The stock market is setting records. We have the highest employment numbers we've ever had in the history of our country. We're doing record business. We have the highest levels of enthusiasm. So the head of Walmart, who I know, who's a very nice guy, was making a political statement. I mean, ask him how he's doing. I do it the same way. And you know why? Because I want to make sure, when I make a statement, that the statement is correct. And there was no way of making a correct statement that early. I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters. Unlike a lot of reporters,
Nazis were there.
I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. And the facts, as they started coming out, were very well stated. In fact, everybody said his statement was beautiful. If he would have made it sooner, that would have been good. I couldn't have made it sooner because I didn't know all of the facts. Frankly, people still don't know all of the facts. It was very important. Excuse me. It was very important to me to get the facts out and correctly, because if I would have made a fast statement, and the first statement was made without knowing much other than what we were seeing. The second statement was made after, with knowledge, with great knowledge. There's still things, there's still things that people don't know. I want to make a statement with knowledge. I wanted to know the facts. Okay.
Was this two questions. Was this terrorism? And can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist?
Well, I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism. You can call it murder. You can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. Because there is a question. Is it murder? Is it terrorism? And then you get into legal semantics. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
Can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist, Mr. Bannon? Can you talk about that?
I would echo Maggie's question. Steve Bannon is.
I never spoke to Mr. Bannon about it.
Can you tell us broadly what do you still have confidence in Steve?
Well, we'll see. Hey, look. I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon. But he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
Do you have confidence that Senator McCain has called on you to defend your National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, against some of these attacks?
I did it the last time.
And he called on it again, linking the
Senator McCain?
To the alt-right. And
Senator McCain, you mean the one who voted against Obamacare?
And he said
who is Senator? You mean Senator McCain who voted against us getting good health care?
McCain said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying,
define it for me. Come on, let's go. Define
Senator
it.
McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came charging at him? Excuse me. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's statement.
Let me ask you this. What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. I'm not finished, fake news. That was a horrible day. I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Go ahead.
Do you think that what you call the alt-left is the same as neo-Nazis?
Those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? But they were there to protest. Excuse me. You take a look the night before. They were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. Infrastructure question. Go ahead.
Very contentious moments there at Trump Tower. President Trump taking questions on his reaction to the events that America witnessed in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. The president saying, I did not wait too long, that he wanted the facts before he made that statement, that second statement to America. Obviously, there was the initial statement and heavy criticism that followed because he did not, in his initial response, point to the specific groups that were involved in some of the horrific scenes we saw in Charlottesville. He went on to talk about reaction to the CEO of Walmart, who said, you missed an opportunity to bring the country together. He said, I did not miss that opportunity. You're looking at pictures. This obviously was the evening before what really unfolded there on Saturday in Charlottesville. And he said that some of those people, you have a lot of people who were innocently protesting. When we see those pictures there the night before, they had a permit. He went on to say to reporters in questions that followed what you just saw there. He also asked, what about the alt-left? What can be said about them? Did they not come charging into the scene as well? Do they own some of the responsibility, in so many words, and I'm paraphrasing there, but then asked about the other folks who came and responded to these protests in Charlottesville. Do they deserve any of the blame? That was the questioning that he began to ask as reporters were standing there asking him about his response and whether or not he missed an opportunity to try to unite America. I do want to bring in Mary Bruce because, Mary, you were right there at Trump Tower. You're now outside. A very contentious scene, as I mentioned, but the president standing firm behind his statement, saying he needed the time, the facts, he said, to put that statement together, although you have reported and our White House team has reported that the First Lady responded, Ivanka Trump responded over the weekend, the Vice President Mike Pence responded, and then the President responded, saying he needed the facts. So obviously there's a question that remains about why so many others were able to respond. But talk to us about what you witnessed there in the lobby and the fact that the President is standing firm.
David, this was quite a scene. The president was defiant and doubling down. Consider the timeline here. We are now 3 days out from that scene in Charlottesville, that hate-fueled violence, and the president now seems to be back at square one, despite the tremendous backlash from his initial statements after this violence. The president now is once again condemning both sides here, saying that there is blame on both sides. And as you mentioned, he coined this new term, it seems, the alt-left, asking what responsibility do they bear? Now, we asked the president, I asked him just to be clear, was he drawing any sort of moral equivalency between what he describes as the alt-left, that side of the protest, and the white supremacists? And the president said no, but that he did then go on to point out that he feels that there were bad people on both sides of this fight. Now, you mentioned the fallout that we have seen since these protests, and it's worth mentioning again that we've seen this rush of CEOs, now 4 CEOs coming out announcing that they are stepping down from their role on the President's Manufacturing Council in protest to the way the president has handled his response to these protests. And now we're hearing reaction from Capitol Hill coming into what the president just said. One Republican member of the House summing it up in just 2 words, tweeting, David, just no.
And Mary, I was struck in watching the news conference. You were the one who did ask about this equivalency question, this moral equivalency between the alt-right and the alt-left, as he seemed to coin during this press conference. He then said, as you said, and pointed back to you, Mary, about you calling it the alt-left. So we should just, for the record, point out that the president actually used that terminology. First, you were simply asking for a clarification. The president then did answer along the way, as you alluded to, Mary, that I think there is blame on both sides here, and went on to say about the initial protest in Charlottesville, some of the images of the tiki torches that we saw, and talking about the people we saw in some of those images images. He said a lot of people were there to innocently protest. They had a permit. He said he should add. I do want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, who led much of our coverage over the weekend as these events were taking place. And Cecilia, it is very clear that this president, even with time, is standing firm. He's defending his timeline and defending his words, quite frankly.
Standing his ground, David, and not backing down. And I think the headlines that will come out of this, those that are emerging already, is really this split, shared blame that the president is placing on the protesters on both sides that we saw there in Charlottesville. He said there is blame on both sides, and he criticized equally both the protesters, the counter-protesters, the alt-left, as he's calling them now, as Mary just said, and the neo-Nazis. And disturbingly, David, some of the reaction that is coming in to the president's press conference just now, former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke is tweeting, thanking the President of the United States for this press conference that we just heard. You can see it there on your screen. Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorists. I'm assuming BLM, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the anti-establishment protesters is what they would call them. This is not going to go away for President Trump. If he thought he was trying to clear this up, this issue, to put this to bed, David, this is going to be something that dogs his campaign, his team, for a long time to come.
Cecilia, thank you. And as you point out, the former leader of the KKK sending out that tweet, and just to add a little more context, because he was on the scene, David Duke, in Charlottesville, and also tweeted after the initial response from President Trump over the weekend, retweeting one of the president's tweets, and in essence, and I'm paraphrasing here, saying, don't forget, Mr. President, that it was white America that put you in the White House. So you can see the tension, and David Duke appearing to be grateful for the words he heard from the president at Trump Tower today. I want to bring in our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. And Pierre, you saw that I asked the Attorney General early this week, Jeff Sessions, on whether or not he believed this was domestic terror, whether there was a civil rights investigation. You heard the president there asked today, was this terror?
Well, he did not answer the question. He said it could be called murder. It could be called many different things. But I think the fascinating thing about today is this notion of the Confederacy. The president seemed to take sides with people who came to protest the taking down of the Robert E. Lee statue. And that is another hot-button issue, David, in this sense, that for the people who support Southern heritage, there's a belief that those statues have value. But for many people of color, particularly African Americans, those statues represent the Civil War, and in terms of people who believed in and fought for slavery. And so, therefore, the president has opened another can of worms in that regard. And the other thing that he didn't really focus on as much in those conversations, David, is the notion that the KKK and the neo-Nazis and the others who were there to support keeping that statue up were also people who are known to foment violence outright.
You know, Pierre, the president was then asked, does he believe those statues should come down? He said that's a question that local communities, that states should tackle, and said in some cases the federal government should look at that particular issue that you bring up. Our thanks to Pierre Thomas, Cecilia Vega, Mary Bruce, our entire White House team. Will have complete coverage coming up on World News tonight. And for many of you, your local news continues on this ABC station. I'm David Muir in New York. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Okay, first the People's Choice Award for Favorite Team, then the Emmy Award for Outstanding.